Hey, everybody. I am so thrilled to be here on the set of the podcast, but I'm here today not with Dave, but with Jenny Evans, who is our Stephen Ministry leader here at the church. And I'm going to let her tell you guys a little bit about Stephen Ministry, introduce herself. Will you tell us like a little bit about how you got into it, how long you've been doing it, and we'll talk a little deeper about all this.
Okay. Thank you for having me on today, Nick.
Absolutely.
And I have been in Stephen Ministry since 2004, but not in this church. I started in Stephen Ministry at another church, and actually the ministry's pastor called and said, "I'd like to start a Stephen Ministry and wondered if you'd like to be on the team." So there were 5 of us that went to Orlando and trained as Stephen leaders, and then came back and trained Stephen ministers, and we did that training probably 5 or 6 times while I was in that church.
Oh, wow.
And had quite a large Stephen ministry there. I also had some experience with caring for someone as a Stephen minister in that process too. So it's been a long journey. And then there was a break where I wasn't involved in it for a while, but that training never goes away.
It's one of those things like once you get it, it's like riding a bike. You kind of know it, you feel and you understand it. Well, for those of you who are kind of checking this out, maybe you saw Jenny in the service get up there and kind of do some preview. You know, this is kind of an extension of that. So I would encourage you to kind of go start by watching the service, watch the little bit of an interview here, because on this set, we're going to go a little bit deeper with what Stephen Ministry does for the church, for individuals, and I'm really excited to highlight this ministry because I don't think it gets enough maybe publicity or it gets out there enough, because maybe some people think they're ashamed to kind of come forward with, but this is community care. This is, us loving our people and coming beside them in a variety of circumstances, which we'll talk about. And sure. Jenny, will you just kind of break down what do Stephen ministers do?
Well, let's use you for an example, shall we?
Okay.
You were recently in the hospital.
I was.
And what if, while you were in the hospital, the doctor had said to you, "Nick, I want you to stay off your leg," because you had cellulitis.
Yep.
"I want you to stay off your leg for at least 4 months. You can't go to work. You can't do anything. You have to just stay home, keep your foot, elevated."
Yeah.
What do you think would have gone through your mind at that point?
Look, I'll be real honest with you. They told me to do that for a week, and it drove me crazy. So if they would have said 3-4 months, I think I would have been in a really bad spot, honestly. Just in a space of emotion. I would have been angry. I probably would have been really sad, and it probably would have impacted kind of like my mental of maybe even getting borderline depressed because it came on so quick for me, like how much life would have changed in just an instant, it felt like.
Sure. And then you might have also wondered about, well, what about the income from my job? Maybe I'm not going to have that. Maybe my family's not going to be able, to do this or that. So there might have been fear, might have been anger.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it have been nice if you were in that situation to have somebody come alongside you, another man who has no skin in the game, who could just come alongside you and say, "I'm here to listen."
Yeah. Because
it'd be easy to take out those frustrations on your family.
Yeah.
Or make your Sunday school class feel like, "Oh no, he's here again to talk about his problem." No. So a Stephen minister could come along beside you and just be focused on you for that time and listen and help you work through things. So that's kind of an example of what a Stephen minister might do.
Right.
So that's one thing.
Yeah, I think this sounds like it's like a one-on-one space that really is focused on just finding a space that you can let your stuff out.
Right.
And for me, if I were talking about myself from coming out of the hospital, it would have been nice to have somebody to bounce just the emotions, because as Nick, I'm an analytical person. So even just to be able to be like, well, what about this? What about this? And somebody to come beside me and go like, "Hey, let's focus on the next right thing." Like to help me slow myself down and go, "You're right. I just need to get to my next doctor's appointment right now." You know what I mean? Like help in those spaces, it would have been crucial.
Well, one other thing I didn't
Yeah.
mention is that if you've been in that situation, a Stephen minister is trained in confidentiality. And that's so crucial because if you broke down and cried about it, or you decided, you just need to complain for a while,
Yeah.
he wouldn't tell anybody. He would just be listening to you and validating your feelings and letting you talk about it
Yeah.
and get those things out. So the confidentiality piece is huge.
Yeah, I think so because I mean, honestly, it takes a lot for me to open up to somebody.
Sure.
And a large part of that is the trust aspect. And to know that there's somebody there that's not going to go share my stuff with anybody else or whatever, that's really cool. Now, for people who might not know anything about it, what would you say, cuz we had my example, but what needs, if we could kind of be more broad about kind of the needs, what needs would you say Stephen ministers like help out with? Like what, I guess
Okay.
maybe what's their area of expertise?
Okay.
Yeah.
Stephen ministers, I'll tell you what we don't do first.
Okay.
Okay. We don't babysit. We don't clean houses. We don't run errands. Those kinds of things are ministries for somebody else.
Sure.
Stephen ministry is an extension of pastoral care. So if you think about what a pastor would do, if a pastor came to visit you, he would listen, he would pray, he would engage you in conversation. Those kinds of things are important for hurting people and
Yeah.
to be able to listen well. So we extend that kind of care in difficult situations for people. I remember in the other church that I was involved in more than a decade ago, I had a care receiver who had been through a home invasion, and she was held at gunpoint. And
Wow.
that just traumatized her completely. But it wasn't a place where she needed ongoing professional help. She just needed somebody to talk through that and work through that. And so we did for several months. She had a lot of fear and anger and just insecurity as a result of that event.
Yeah.
But so that was one thing. It was a temporary issue, but it was something that she really needed help to just process.
Yeah.
Okay, so things like that. And then there was a point in my life when I could have used a Stephen minister. Well, there's been many points, but
Sure.
in 1983, when my first husband left and went off with another woman, I just could have used a Stephen minister to talk to debrief with, to just depend on for a while and
Yeah.
to be there as support. When I remarried in 1998, suddenly some of those abandonment issues and other problems that had, been back then but never surfaced, so they came into play then.
Yeah.
So I think Stephen ministry would have really helped me at that point.
Right.
Stephen ministers, when life changes happen, things like moving into a new neighborhood or giving up a job, maybe you retire, maybe you just lose your job because of cutbacks or something, or other things like miscarriage for a woman, things like, well, if you have the death of a spouse or the death of a marriage or just multitudes of things that Stephen ministers come alongside and just walk with the person
Yeah.
through those times of stress.
It sounds like a wide net of support, but the beauty in it is it kind of just feels like a Stephen minister comes by and just kind of links arms, like, hey, I'm going to help you walk for a little while.
Exactly.
Like I'm here for that support and whatever that space is, because we all know life happens.
Absolutely.
And it doesn't warn us. It doesn't give us time to prepare. Most of the time it's, like for me, I woke up one day and I had 103 fever and a swollen leg that was highly infected. I didn't know 24 hours before that's where I was going to be. I was actually getting ready to do 4th of July stuff. You know what I mean? Like
Yep.
I was at a cookout with my family. So,
Right.
and then all of a sudden stuff happens. And, for all of us, as life happens, a ministry like this is so crucial because it has people there ready to grab that arm and just say, we're going to walk through this together for a little
Right.
while.
Well, I mentioned earlier a Sunday school class, and I didn't mean to say that people won't listen.
Yeah.
They do listen, and they're very supportive of Sunday school class. But Stephen Ministry is a little different because
Yeah.
in a Sunday school class or a small group environment, you have a lot of different people who have needs.
Yeah.
But a Stephen minister comes alongside one person, same gender, one person who then they focus on that individual for an hour a week for as long as it takes
Yeah.
for that person's life to sort of normalize again. And that can be, 2 months, or it could be 2 years or something. And, it depends on when both the Stephen minister and the care receiver feel that the initial issue has been resolved. So I think that's a really important distinction, that you get that Stephen minister's attention. You are the center of that person's attention,
Yeah.
one-on-one for that period of time, an hour to an hour and a half a week.
Yeah.
And that can be really important.
I agree, because there's so often that people can kind of get lost in the shuffle of other things going on, and sometimes they need to be that center.
Yes.
Like they have enough things going on in their world that having just that focused piece really becomes a meaningful opportunity. And so how would somebody go about being connected? If somebody's out there maybe watching, or they know somebody who could benefit from somebody coming beside them like this, like Stephen ministers do, how would they know how to get involved?
How would they get involved?
Yeah.
Well, sometimes a friend can recommend a person for Stephen ministry. In other words, if I came over to your house when you were going through your
Sure.
recovery, and I saw that you were really struggling, I could say to you, Nick, I was wondering if you might consider having a Stephen minister. Would you let me go and talk to the Stephen leader and have them call you? And if you give me permission for that,
Yeah.
then the Stephen leader would call you. Okay? And we've had that happen. A friend came and said that one of her friends was going through a struggle, and asked me about, talking with her, and I said, well, I'd be happy to, but I need her permission.
Yeah.
So you need to make sure you get her permission for me to call her, get her phone number and give it to me, and I can call.
Yeah.
Okay, another way is sometimes a pastor has been working with somebody. Maybe the person lost their spouse, and they need some ongoing care, and the pastor can't be there every week.
Right.
So he might say to this person, would you like for me to recommend a Stephen minister for you? And if the person agrees, the pastor would come and say, look, I've got this lady or this man who lost a spouse, and, well, let's get them a Stephen minister. They need some ongoing support for a while.
Right. Like as you
So-
said, it's the extension of that pastoral care.
Exactly, yeah. So it can be many ways. The main thing is that person who's going to be the care receiver, potentially, needs to give permission, and then the Stephen leader needs to contact them to tell them what's involved.
Right.
So that then they can, and to find out more about them, because what happens in the match between a Stephen minister and a care receiver is that the Stephen leader will pray about the situation and see who might be available, who's a good match for that individual.
Yeah.
And because in this case, I know the Stephen ministers and know kind of, what their backgrounds are a little bit and such
Sure.
from the training. So another thing is we do not require people to be church members
Okay.
in order
That's
to
good to
have
know.
a Stephen minister. We serve the wider community as well.
Yeah.
And in fact, one lady who was affiliated with the soccer
The upward
ministry,
soccer. Yeah.
Upward Soccer, a while back, contacted the church because she knew that we had Stephen ministry and
Okay.
asked about it. So it can come just from the person themselves as well.
Well, I mean, I can attest to that. I had a friend that we knew, me and my wife Rachel, we knew could use just somebody to talk to, somebody to process through. They were going through some stuff in their life, and we got in touch with you guys and said like, hey, we could really use somebody, and sure enough, so I think that's such a cool part of the ministry of it. Is that it looks inside to care. Like pastoral care inside the church, but also missional care kind of outside is just, these are these are people, you guys have to understand, these are people who have been significantly trained, like Stephen
50
ministers,
hours.
50
Yeah.
hours of training. This isn't like somebody walked up and said, hey, I want to do this, and they got a badge immediately. Like they do a lot to get to a spot where they can be called Stephen ministers, because there's so much importance about being able to come beside somebody and be able to care in the right ways, and to be able to identify the scenarios going on, and to just love on people in a special way, and I think that's a very cool piece. But so let's to kind of wrap, I guess, this piece of getting connected. Is there an email address? Is there what's the best way somebody can come with, like, get information straight to you or to whoever would receive that?
Yeah, they can call the church
Okay.
and leave a message on the pastoral with Pastor Dave.
Yep.
And then he can let us know, or approach me or any one of us who is a Stephen minister, and most of us wear our badges, or we
That's
try to
right.
remember to do that.
Yep.
But approach us and just say, hey, I know someone who could use a Stephen minister, or I would like to know more about it. And then, and then the process can kick in from there.
Great. So yeah, so call the phone number. Call the church. Let them know that you're seeking care, or somebody who could use some care in that space. But also look out for these blue badges. Show it off there. And they're around the church all the time, and I can attest they wear their badges most Sundays. And there's how many Stephen ministers do we have here at the church?
Right now, our team is 6 of
Okay.
us. Yeah.
So
And,
that's a good number, and which means there should be at least 1 to 3 every Sunday kind of around. So,
Sure.
and you can also go to the information station, and we can help connect and stuff like that. There's a lot of ways we can get there. So if you are looking, and I'll say it's brave to take those steps to find help. And if you are looking, we want to do the best way we can get you connected. So come find one of the Stephen ministers. Call the church. It's very important. Now, just for fun, what would you say the hardest part of being a Stephen minister is?
Well, this is probably the least fun question you could have.
I know, but I just wanted to throw some. I want to know all sides of it. You know what I mean? We've been talking about the
hard
easy
part. I think the hardest part of being in Stephen ministry is watching people go through 50 hours of training, and then we have 2 meetings every month, and most of those meetings we have ongoing, continuing education and
Okay.
care. So the hardest part is seeing people so well prepared wait and wait and wait for somebody to come forward and say, I'd like to have a Stephen minister. I think in American culture we have this theology of independence, if you will, that says, I can do this by myself.
Yeah.
It's just between me and God and nobody else. And I sometimes wonder if people actually treat God that way too. That they say, no, God, this is not big for you. This is just something I can do.
Yeah.
That's not the way that God wants us to work. He's interested in the details of our lives.
Yes.
And he gave us one another to serve one another and to love one another and to support and carry one another's burdens. That's part of that's scripture. Just to be able to convince people it's not sinful to hurt.
Yeah.
And to need help, and it is biblical to request that help and to seek it from one another and to support one another.
Right.
So I think being in Stephen ministry, it's such a blessing to be able to be trusted with people's burdens and with people's needs, and to pray about that and to pray with them about that.
Yeah.
So. So the hardest part is that people just don't come forward a lot of times when they have
we
needs.
could probably have a whole separate conversation on that, because I think that is a very prevalent thing, is that we feel like we can handle it, but there's so much beauty in trusting community and letting people come beside you, and that's something even in my recent hospital stay that I had to learn, because I would say I can be one of those who I could handle this, or I internalize and it's like, I don't want to be seen as weak. I can handle this, or, and I do have my own support system that I do rely into, but it's taken me a while to trust that support system. So that's why I use it. But to come to a space, I think even my nurses at the hospital were like, "Hey, we can help you." You know what I mean? And I'm like, "No, I could do this." You know what I mean? Like, it's just that stubbornness. And I think sometimes that probably does relate to my relationship with God. But, these people, the Stephen ministers here at the church, they're not, that wasn't a ploy of like, "Hey, we need something to do. Please give us something to do." This is a genuine care for the body. And they don't want people to be out there hurting that could have a way out of that hurt.
Amen.
Or that
Right.
could find a way to help move along, because sometimes pain, sometimes grief, sometimes those are journeys that are longer than a few weeks or a couple years. But to have somebody to help you get started back in that journey of healing, of restoration, these people have been trained for that, and that is what they want for the body. That is what they want for the people. I'm assuming I'm speaking
Well
correctly
said.
into that.
Yes, well
And
said.
they're just want to know that there's a resource here at the church for anybody who's out there hurting, who needs help, who life is just randomly felt like it's just poured on, or the waves of life have just kind of hit. Like, one thing wasn't a big deal. Two things, okay, I can handle it. But three things, because sometimes life seems to work in that way, where it's just piling and piling. But there's people here who can help. And Jenny, I thank you for the time that you put into loving and caring for this ministry. I think it's a crucial ministry here at the church because it is one that's directly what God asked us to do: love our neighbors as ourselves. And I think in that space, I want you, the church, to hear them, because this is such an awesome, awesome ministry, and it's something we need in our community. So thank you for loving the church in this way. Thank you to the other Stephen ministers out there who might be watching for the time that you put into this. In church, dive into it. Don't be afraid. There's no scarlet letters. The Stephen minister's not going to come hunt you down every week and be like, "Are you good?" It's going to be a safe space to feel. It's going to be a safe space to love, to feel that love and all those things. So, well, thank you for giving us some time. Thank you for coming on the
Thanks for having
podcast
me.
set. And if you guys have any more questions about what Stephen ministers do, don't be afraid to shoot the emails over to Pastor Dave, to come find us on a Sunday morning and have a deeper conversation about it. We would welcome that opportunity and all those good things. So is there anything here at the end that you'd like to add?
I can't think of anything. Thank you again for having me on.
Absolutely.
And we'll just continue to pray. Oh, there is one thing.
Yeah.
Please pray for our Stephen ministry, all of you out there, that we are wounded healers. We're not perfect. And, there's the humanness part of it.
Absolutely.
But we can relate to people in pain. So we hope that you'll let us do that.
Yep. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for watching, and we'll catch you next time.